Hello, dear YouTube viewers. I hope you're doing well. Okay, let's start our video. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, the kind where the light spills gently through the curtains and the air feels almost too calm to be real. The kind of day made for slow moments and familiar company. The drive to his wife's parents' house was peaceful, the streets quiet except for the occasional sound of a lawnmower or a child's laughter in the distance. This was their routine. Family lunch at his in-laws' place, a tradition that had settled into their lives so comfortably that he could almost predict every moment before it happened. The house smelled exactly as it always did on Sundays. Rich baked chicken roasting in the oven, the yeasty warmth of freshly baked bread cooling on the counter, and the faint hint of cinnamon from something sweet his mother-in-law must have hidden away for later. He could already picture the living room. His father-in-law settled in his favorite chair, flipping lazily through the newspaper, his wife leaning against the kitchen counter, chatting with her mother, and her younger brother setting the table with mismatched plates that somehow still made the whole thing feel homely. For him, these lunches had always been easy. There'd be laughter over old stories, playful teasing from his mother-in-law, mostly harmless little jabs about how he needed to eat more or work less, and long conversations about nothing in particular. It was a space where he didn't have to think too hard about anything, just enjoy the rhythm of family life. As they pulled into the driveway, he glanced at his wife and smiled. Today, like every Sunday, he expected nothing unusual, no surprises, no drama, just a meal surrounded by people who had long ago accepted him as one of their own. In his mind, the day was already planned. Eat, laugh, linger over dessert, and drive home feeling full in more ways than one. He had no idea that within the hour, that peaceful rhythm would be completely broken. They were still in that warm pre-lunch bustle when the sound of the doorbell cut through the hum of voices and clinking cutlery. He thought little of it at first, probably a neighbor, maybe a delivery. But then came the sound of footsteps across the hardwood floor, firm and steady, carrying a strange familiarity. When the figure appeared in the doorway, it was like a small ripple passing through the room. Ryan, his wife's ex-boyfriend, taller than he remembered, still carrying himself with that same easy confidence, as if every space he entered automatically belonged to him. He smiled in a way that was just a shade too self-assured, the kind of smile that said he already knew he'd turned heads. The husband's gut reaction was a sharp spike of surprise that quickly shifted to irritation, but he tucked it neatly away behind a polite, neutral expression. If this was some sort of unexpected reunion, he wasn't going to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him unsettled. His wife, however, couldn't hide her reaction so easily. The color drained slightly from her face, her eyes darting toward her mother in silent question, her fingers curling into the edge of the table. "Oh," her mother said lightly, almost cheerfully, as if she were announcing the arrival of a dessert. "I thought it would be nice to invite an old friend." She said it without the faintest awareness of the tension she had just introduced into the room. Ryan took a seat as though it had been reserved for him, slipping into the flow of small talk with practiced ease. The air seemed heavier now, the clatter of cutlery against plates suddenly louder. A stretch of awkward silence settled between every few sentences, as if the normal rhythm of conversation had been interrupted, and no one knew quite how to get it back. Eventually, words began to fill the gaps again, but the easy comfort from before had been replaced with a quiet unease that hummed beneath every exchange. He watched quietly as Ryan slid into the chair directly across from his wife, the movement casual, practiced, as though he had been there 100 times before. Ryan's eyes met hers with a familiarity that made her shift slightly in her seat, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Hey, sweetheart," Ryan said, his tone light, teasing, using the nickname she hadn't heard in years. She stiffened at the sound, her hands tightening around her napkin, and carefully avoided meeting his gaze. The narrator kept his expression calm, lips pressed into a polite smile, reminding himself repeatedly, "This is just lunch. I can handle it." He refused to let a flicker of irritation or jealousy show, knowing that any reaction might give Ryan the satisfaction of seeing he had unsettled him. Around them, the rest of the family carried on as if nothing had changed. Laughter bubbled from the other end of the table, stories were shared, and the scent of roasted chicken and warm bread still filled the air. Plates were passed, drinks refilled, and the usual rhythm of Sunday lunch continued. But beneath the surface, the narrator's mind was sharp, observing every small detail. He noticed the way Ryan's shoulder leaned slightly toward his wife, the ease with which he laughed at jokes only she remembered. Each glance, each subtle touch, each fleeting smile was catalogued and analyzed. He made mental notes of everything, understanding the importance of keeping his composure while quietly assessing the situation. Though outwardly calm, inside he was fully alert, every sense attuned to the silent tensions building across the table. Ryan leaned back in his chair, a mischievous grin playing on his lips as he launched into a story about a high school prank gone wrong, a tale he and the wife had apparently shared long ago. He recounted it with exaggerated gestures, embellishing details for comedic effect, and punctuated every sentence with a laugh that seemed aimed more at drawing attention than at genuine amusement. The narrator listened, lips curved in a polite smile, nodding at just the right moments. But he couldn't resist slipping in small, sharp comments, carefully measured to be witty without being overtly hostile. "Ah yes, the infamous painted principal incident," he said, his voice light but edged with irony, a masterstroke of teenage creativity and poor planning. The joke drew polite laughter, but it subtly reminded everyone that he, too, was part of the story now and fully aware. His wife occasionally interjected, correcting Ryan with quiet firmness. "Actually, that wasn't quite how it happened," she said, her tone neutral, but her eyes briefly meeting her husband's across the table, a silent plea for support without forcing him to intervene. She seemed determined to distance herself from Ryan's memory-laden tales while still keeping the conversation civil. Under the table, the narrator noticed her leg tapping nervously, her hand moving in restless circles. It was a subtle signal, a small expression of discomfort that she tried to hide but couldn't fully suppress. He made a mental note, keeping his outward calm intact, even as the tension thickened. Each laugh, each story, each carefully worded correction built a quiet battlefield, and he remained poised, ready for the moment when he might need to take control. The conversation had been carrying on with an uneasy rhythm, each story and comment carefully measured, until Ryan leaned forward slightly, a sly glint in his eyes. "We were always great together, weren't we?" he said, his voice light but loaded, as if testing the waters. A few nervous chuckles rippled around the table, awkward and uncertain, like everyone had heard the tension but didn't know how to respond. His wife's face tightened, her hands gripping the edge of the table, while his mother-in-law looked between them with a hint of confusion. The narrator felt a quiet storm rise within him, a mix of irritation, disbelief, and something sharper he refused to name. Yet he didn't let it show. Instead, he slowly curved his lips into a smile, calm, controlled, almost serene, and pushed his chair back with deliberate slowness. The scrape of the legs against the floor drew every eye to him. Standing fully upright, he let the moment hang for a heartbeat before speaking in a voice low, calm, and even. "I need to grab something from the car," he said, each word measured, carrying an unspoken weight. He started toward the door, the casual movement belying the tension simmering beneath the surface. But instead of stepping outside into the sunlight, he turned sharply into the kitchen, his mind already moving ahead, formulating a plan that would shift the balance of the room. What everyone else saw as a simple errand was, in truth, the first move in a carefully orchestrated response that none of them would see coming. Once inside the kitchen, he closed the door softly behind him and leaned against the counter, letting the muffled voices from the dining room fade into background noise. Pulling out his phone, he tapped a familiar number, his expression calm but focused. This wasn't a casual call to a friend. It was to the private investigator he had quietly retained months ago, long before today's lunch, long before Ryan even thought to reappear. The line clicked, and the investigator's calm, precise voice answered. Within minutes, the husband had a clear picture of Ryan's recent life. He listened intently as the investigator outlined Ryan's shadowy business dealings, a string of failed ventures, questionable contracts, and even a recent criminal record that had never made the headlines. The pieces fell together seamlessly. The charming ex-boyfriend wasn't back in town for innocent reasons. Most chilling was the confirmation that Ryan's interest in reconnecting with his wife wasn't nostalgic or friendly. Every move, every casual greeting and sly joke had been calculated, aimed at exploiting her trust and manipulating the situation for his gain. The husband's mind raced, weighing the right moment to act, but a quiet satisfaction settled over him. He now held the knowledge and the upper hand. What had begun as an awkward family lunch had quietly transformed into a controlled revelation, one he could navigate with precision while everyone else remained unaware of the full truth. He returned to the dining room with the same calm, confident smile, sliding back into his chair as if nothing had changed. The conversation around the table paused mid-sentence, the room sensing the shift in energy. Leaning slightly forward, his eyes locked on Ryan's, he spoke in a calm, even tone that carried more weight than his words suggested. "So," he said, tilting his head slightly, "how's that business of yours doing since the fraud charges?" The words landed like a hammer. The table went utterly silent. Ryan froze, his confident grin faltering, eyes widening as if suddenly aware of the precarious position he was in. His mother-in-law gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth, while his wife looked between the two men, confusion and shock etched across her face. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but only stammered, trying to deny the accusation, trying to laugh it off. But the narrator remained steady, patient, letting the tension build. With a deliberate motion, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a neatly organized dossier, the pages crisp and detailed. He placed it on the table in front of Ryan, spreading the evidence so everyone could see. Photocopies of records, news clippings, and official documents glinted under the soft light, leaving no room for doubt. The room held its collective breath as the truth, carefully compiled, verified, and undeniable, lay bare before them. The smile on the narrator's face never wavered. Control, poise, and quiet satisfaction radiated from him as the tables of power had finally shifted. The moment the dossier hit the table, the atmosphere shifted entirely. His mother-in-law's eyes widened in horror as realization dawned. She had unwittingly invited someone dangerous into her home, someone whose past and intentions were far from harmless. Her hands trembled slightly as she muttered, "I didn't know." His wife's expression darkened, not toward him, but at her mother. The feeling of betrayal ran deep, though it wasn't aimed at her husband. How could her mother have been so careless, inviting Ryan without even a warning? She looked to him for reassurance, and he offered a calm, protective smile, placing a steadying hand over hers under the table. Ryan, sensing the walls closing in, shifted in his chair and made a sudden movement toward the door. I should go," he started, his voice losing its earlier confidence. "You're not going anywhere until you answer a few questions," the narrator said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Every word carried authority, a quiet dominance that made the once charming ex-boyfriend hesitate. Tension thickened in the room. Ryan's usual charm and practiced confidence began to crumble, revealing glimpses of panic, desperation, and the true selfishness that had been masked behind smiles and nostalgia. The mask had fallen, and the man seated before them was no longer the casual, confident figure who had tried to charm the room. It was someone exposed, cornered, and undeniably flawed. The quiet Sunday lunch had erupted into a confrontation charged with raw honesty, leaving everyone in the room holding their breath as the truth unfolded. Ryan's shoulders slumped, the last threads of his confidence snapping. His voice wavered as he finally spoke, the charm completely gone. I came because I needed money," he admitted, each word heavy with shame and desperation. "I thought maybe she could help me out." His gaze flicked nervously toward the wife, but it held no warmth, only the hollow calculation that had guided his return. The wife's eyes widened as the realization hit. Every casual invitation, every joke, every friendly gesture from her mother now made sense. Ryan had been manipulating her family from the start, using her mother as a bridge to get closer to her again. The betrayal stung, but it fueled her clarity. She wasn't the one deceived by charm. She was the one seeing the truth at last. Her husband remained calm, his posture relaxed but unyielding. He leaned slightly forward, his voice firm and measured. "If you ever show up again," he said, letting the words hang in the room like steel. "You'll be explaining yourself to the police." Ryan's face paled, and for a moment he seemed frozen, weighing his options. Then, with a sudden, frustrated motion, he stormed toward the door. The slam echoed through the house, reverberating off the walls, leaving silence in its wake. The room exhaled collectively, tension slowly dissipating, but the impact of the confrontation lingered. The quiet Sunday lunch had been irrevocably changed, yet a sense of justice and control now settled firmly over the family. The room was quiet now, the echoes of the slammed door still lingering in the air. His wife reached across the table, her eyes soft but filled with lingering embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice low, "for everything. This shouldn't have happened." He reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "It's not your fault," he said gently, his tone calm but firm. "We handled it together." His mother-in-law dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, tears glistening on her cheeks. "I really thought I was doing something nice," she admitted, her voice breaking with regret. "I had no idea." He nodded, giving a small, understanding smile, then turned his attention back to his wife. "We just need to make sure no one ever interferes in our marriage like that again," he said quietly but resolutely, establishing the boundary without anger, with the calm authority that had carried him through the tense confrontation. The family gradually resumed their lunch, conversation slower, softer, more thoughtful. Laughter returned in small doses, and the aroma of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the room once again. Though the day had taken an unexpected turn, a sense of relief and renewed closeness settled over the table, stronger than before. The ordeal had passed, but the lesson lingered. Together, they could face anything. Later that night, the house had finally quieted. The soft glow of the living room lamp cast warm shadows across the walls as they sat together on the couch, a blanket draped loosely over their laps. She turned toward him, her eyes filled with gratitude and a touch of lingering tension. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice low but sincere, "for staying calm back there, for not turning it into a public fight." He gave her a small, reassuring smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Some things are better handled quietly," he replied. "We don't need to make a scene to protect what matters." They spoke then, openly and honestly, about trust, about setting boundaries, and about how to handle family drama in the future. Words flowed easily, a gentle release of all the built-up tension from the afternoon. Laughter returned in small doses, punctuating the serious conversation, reminding them both of the strong bond that had carried them through the day. As she finally leaned her head against his shoulder and let out a relaxed sigh, he reflected quietly to himself, sometimes the best revenge is staying calm and being prepared. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about preserving their peace, their trust, and the quiet strength of the life they were building together. And tonight, that victory felt more satisfying than any confrontation ever could. A few weeks later, the narrator's phone buzzed with a familiar ringtone. It was the investigator. "He's gone," the calm voice on the other end confirmed. "Ryan has left town for good. No signs of him coming back." A sense of quiet relief washed over him. The tension that had hung over their family lunches dissipated, replaced once again by the familiar warmth of home-cooked meals, laughter, and stories shared around the table. Life returned to its comforting rhythm, ordinary and peaceful. He caught his wife sigh across the table one afternoon as they laughed over a shared memory, and a small, knowing smile tugged at his lips. That unexpected lunch, full of awkward tension and hidden truths, had revealed more than just Ryan's motives. It had shown who truly stood by her side, who remained calm under pressure, and who would protect their life together, no matter what. With that thought, he let himself relax completely, savoring the normalcy, the love, and the quiet victory that didn't need words to be understood. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe our channel.